Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And welcome to my favorite day of the week, day for another new Quran halaqah. I wanted to welcome everyone. This is such a gift and such a special treat that we could gather. You guys know that it's just like living with all of this knowledge it just weighs on you. And so every time that the professor starts telling me how much it's weighing on him, I always nudge and go, please give us a halaqah. So then last minute he decided to do that, and then last night we were sort of talking about this, and he shared with Sharif and I what halaqah he was going to cover today. And then he said, it's your fault, because it started sounding a little scary, because this is like these ones, every chapter is just so weighty. And, he reminded us that now that we have this knowledge and it's been given to us, that it's not just like a nice satisfaction of your curiosity and understanding, but this is actually now something that you will be held accountable for, because, you've been given the knowledge and now you're on notice. And so I had a little fit of, oh my God, this is really scary. And if, 5 halaqahs so far have now increased, my accountability on the final day, I was like, well, I don't know, maybe we don't want 114. I'm totally joking. But yes, of course we do. But, it just was a reminder that it's like there's a responsibility that comes with this knowledge. And, it can like really make you feel like, oh my God. So alhamdulillah, because I would rather know and be held accountable than be, kept in ignorance. And so I feel really grateful that we have another opportunity to gather. And just a quick update. So we are now, we had made the goal that at every 25 additional donors as a milestone, we would have another new Quran halaqah. We are 3 donors away. So that's the equivalent of 3 people saying, yes, I will give $100 a month for 12 months, or $3,600. And then we can have another Quran halaqah, inshallah. So let's do it. And I just wanted to tell you, actually, just to announce, we've been doing a lot on the fundraising and marketing side, just trying to strategize about what to do. We have some really, exciting plans and ideas that we're working on implementing. But one of the most exciting things is just to announce the name that we came up with, because a lot of people had mentioned, well, New Quran Project is a little bit, nondescript and not very exciting to build anything around. And there are other projects out there called the Quran Project and so forth. But so after some brainstorming, we came up with the name Project Illumine, Illumine, and then the subtitle is The Light of the Quran. So I think it's a really beautiful name, Project Illumine, and it has a lot of, sort of mentioned, it creates a lot of imagery of light, and I think that the words themselves are kind of beautiful, and that, I can imagine how they could look with proper calligraphy, scripting, or styling, or something like that. So it's something very beautiful to build on. So you'll hopefully see more of that in the future. Also, we started actually teaching at the law school this week. The semester started for the professor. So we are kind of back to reality, real life, and more demands. So I say that just to say, we have a lot going on, and that, apologize if people are reaching out or emailing and I'm not getting back to you. It's just an overload of things. We're usually buried under one mountain, and now I think we're buried under 2 mountains. So please forgive, any delays in getting back to people. And on that note, just to say, we had announced a week ago, or 2 weekly emails ago, that the applications are now open for people who are, would like to be considered as a student working with the professor on Project Illumine. And the deadline for that, it's really just, it's simple. It's 2 questions, which is, just to tell us about yourself and your background, and secondly, why you're interested in doing this. And I just wanted to comment that, I've received a few emails that I apologize I have not responded to, but there are some people who have asked the question what's involved? I'm wondering how this would fit in my schedule. Here's my circumstances. I'm sort of excited to know that this is a possibility. And I just wanted to say, just from my point of view, if, this is an opportunity to really, learn something incredible that becomes part of you that you can carry on to future generations. And it's a way to train yourself to be in service to God. And if your questions are geared around how this will fit into your existing schedule, then this is probably not the project for you. So this is something where it's like, it's a major sacrifice where you're taking a year out of your life at least to immerse yourself. It's not something that you do part-time. It's not something that is going to have to conform to your schedule. It's really something that I think you have to believe in so much that you're sort of willing to sacrifice whatever you've got going on in your life and just plunge into this. If that's not where you are, of course, there's no problem with that at all. And we, our goal and hope is to have weekly halakas. And so if you guys are even able to keep up with that, I'm super impressed, because that's a really difficult thing. If we're having 5 and 6 hour halakas every Saturday night, and, that's a ton of learning. It's hard to keep up with already. And, also with the khutbahs and everything like that. So, this immersion program is not for everyone. And there's no shame in that. This is just, we're looking for, gifted students who are, prepared. And of course, that's going to be up to the sheikh to determine. But as far as scheduling and, how it fits into your life, I think that's a really good understanding of whether this is something that, would be good for you or not. So anyway, and with that, I just wanted to welcome everybody. It's lovely to be together again. It's this, again, like, it really helps, especially during the pandemic, to feel connected with people who share a passion for the Quran with you. So thank you for joining, and inshallah, looking forward to an amazing session.
Start. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه واتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. How are you guys? Are there any people hiding? Most of you have your cameras on. I think are there 3 people without the cameras on?
Yeah, my camera's being problematic. I'm trying to fix it. It's Sidian.
Oh, Serene.
Her camera's not.
Hi, Jenna here, but I'm in public. My camera can't be on. So assalamu alaikum.
What?
Did you see that?
What?
Okay, Serene is having problems with her camera, and Jenna is in public, so she can't really be seen.
What does that mean?
I'm gonna turn on my camera soon. I promise. Assalamu alaikum.
She's gonna turn on her camera soon. She's being a stealth learner.
Oh, okay.
And I know, and
Oh, where's Rami?
they're running just a few minutes behind. They have the camera on, but they're just running. They let me know, so
Okay.
they're there.
Okay. Bismillah. Inshallah, we will talk about Surah Al-Hijr. Before we plunge into that, just a couple of things. On that note of responsibility, yes, learning, any learning, there's a great ajr in learning. There's a great reward. Every time your knowledge increases, there is a certain opportunities and potentialities of blessings that open up to you. Knowledge is a great blessing. The more knowledgeable you are, the closer you are to Allah. the closer you are to barakah, the more barakah is available to you. In many ways, learning is like being placed into a vehicle. A vehicle with great amount of energy and power and capabilities. And so you can take this vehicle to great distances. At the same time, there is a responsibility that comes with learning, in that your life before learning a surah and after learning a surah cannot be the same. One of the worst things that people do with knowledge is to satisfy a curiosity, but their life remains centered around their egos. It remains centered around the I, that endlessly selfish I. And that is definitely a problem. Your life before learning a surah cannot be the same as after learning a surah. It doesn't mean that Allah expects you to transform overnight or instantaneously, but it does mean that once Allah blesses you with a knowledge and with possibilities, and you know that you have stepped into that special position of being able to draw closer to Allah in ways that even you can't imagine. Once you are aware of that, is that you must strive hard to transform your life through the knowledge that you've acquired. It is extremely wise to keep track of what you've learned in 5 surahs so far. And that's, of course, I'm not counting the tafsir that I've given before, or any of the halaqat or any of the khutab, but let's just focus on this, the new material, the 5 surah we've done. It is very wise to keep track of what you've learned, whether you whichever way you keep track of knowledge, whether you write notes or you, whatever it is, and to go back and to consistently and persistently remind yourself of what you've learned, and to internalize it, and to work hard at having this knowledge act to change things about yourself that you want to improve, or that you suspect you are going to be held accountable for in the hereafter. Hold yourself accountable now before you are held accountable. In this vein, Grace, can you grab the... remember, and I think I've talked about this somewhere before, that the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, we have a number of reports that they would, once the Prophet ﷺ would receive revelation that they would work together to implement what they've learned, and that they would, once they've turned a Quranic revelation, once they've internalized the Quranic revelation, and they move on to the next. In other words, once they've effectively implemented the Quranic revelation, they move on to the next. And we know that there were various groups, whether known as the Qurra, or that were basically groups that focused on studying and learning the Quran together. We also know that the Prophet ﷺ, among the system that was adopted, is people were, it's called mu'akha, where basically there would be a sisterhood or brotherhood declared between certain people, or organized between certain people, who helped each other become better Muslims. I think the system of fidelity and is very important, to work together to help one another become better Muslims. And in our case, to work together to turn the learning that you've acquired into actual concrete life transformations. And so in this context, I want to suggest to you something that I've done and it was very effective for me, and it helped me a great deal. Much more important, I mean, I know that some of you have created reading groups and so on. Reading groups are useful, but they're an intellectual exercise. I mean, they engage your intellect. You have conversations. They don't necessarily induce life transformations. What I would like to suggest to you is that you form not study groups, that's not the point, but implementation groups. In other words, you form groups that discusses the surah that you've learned, the surah that we've had halaqas on. Particularly the 5 that we've talked about, is Sajda, Al-Jathiyah, Yasin, Ar-Rahman, the 5 that we've covered so far. To go over, to have a discussion amongst yourself about what you've learned in the halaqah, what type of life transformations that learning would require of you. I would suggest that the group would be between people that that you feel comfortable with, because it would require, these discussions would require a certain amount of honesty and transparency. Leave your ego aside. These are not groups to prove your how much Islamic knowledge you have, or to prove how intelligent you are, or to prove. In fact, these groups must be premised on humility and a sincere desire to to help one another to draw closer to Allah. If you don't have a sincere desire to see your brother and sister move forward, to help your brother and sister, then this process is not going to work for you. This is not about serving your ego. It has to be about, in fact, humbling your ego. And where you discuss what type of changes you think the learning of the surah would be needed, or what type of changes would be needed from what you've learned, and then to help one another to, in fact, enforce these changes and bring these changes about to life, and to hold each other accountable. I mean, not, you don't. This is not a confessional, but do if you decide, for instance, that just an example, that, for instance, what you've learned is that you should not lie. And you'd say, okay, I'm going to see how long I can go without uttering an untruth. And then when you meet, you discuss with each other frankly whether, in fact, you were able to hold to that commitment or not. I think these types of spiritual unions are far more effective than reading groups or than all the egoism that we engage in. And I'm not putting down reading groups. I've I have an enormous amount of respect for that as well. But what is more important when the Quran speaks about a certain amount of brotherhood and sisterhood between Muslims. It is talking about something that needs to be blessed by Allah. The barakah of mu'akha. And that barakah only comes when people come together to, an Islamic expression, to vow in good deeds. And vowing good deeds means what? We've turned it into rhetoric, into dogma. But vow in good deeds, it doesn't mean bragging or egoism or, pretending to be a scholar or pretending to be an imam or pretending to be whatever people pretend to be these days. Vow in good deeds means this type of helping one another come closer to Allah. Groups that I belong to early in my life, we would challenge each other for the most fasting, the most praying, the most works and sadaqah and social works that would help people. Whatever it is that you, after studying a surah, come to agree on as something that you collectively make a commitment to come closer to Allah. And it is very important that these groups have no leader. All of you are leaders, and perhaps however way you organize it, whether you rotate discussion leadership or have rules for discussions that you abide with. But again, these groups cannot be about a person's ego or someone stepping forward because they have a more assertive personality or anything like that. This is my strong recommendation, and it would be of great benefit to you. Every once in a while, if one or more groups, it doesn't have to all be the same group, but there could be several groups that is born out of this. It depends on how you feel about each other and how you feel about working together. Every once in a while, a group can invite me to meet with them and answer questions or something like that, but this is something that has to be driven by you and your desire and by a passion to turn what you learn into real life. Any questions about that, or is the idea clear?
Oh. 1 second.
No questions? Oh, the other thing is some while the halaqah is going on, it is very important that there are no side chats. Of course, it is as a rule of etiquette and as an important step to keep your full attention and focus on material, because we're learning the Quran, and there's nothing more honorable than learning the Quran. You should not engage in any sidebars. Writing a question directed at the teacher is okay, but questions directed at each other or comments directed at each other are not acceptable. This is exactly the same like being in a classroom. And when I'm in class, I don't allow any side conversations between students, and all comments have to be directed at the teacher, not by students at each other. The other thing is a question that came up about teaching this material. And why I don't allow the students to teach this material. This is not about learning a certain amount of data about one surah or another and then transmitting this data to others. This is precisely this segmented approach to the Quran is precisely what has caused so many problems in our relationship with the Quran. We said that the first rule of learning is humility. But the second rule of learning is patience. And the reason you need patience is that the message of the Quran is an integrated whole. You don't know the Quran until you've learned the entire Quran. Until you have the message of the Quran inside of you. Anyone that steps in a position of a teacher, there are a responsibility and an accountability before God, and a responsibility that they carry before society, before themselves, and before God. And the responsibility is one of adequate and sufficient knowledge. And when it comes to the Quran, for someone to teach, adequate and sufficient knowledge is in fact equal to knowledge of the entire Quran. You cannot present if someone comes and says, what is political asylum, since I'm teaching political asylum this semester? What is political asylum about? And let's say they attend a week of classes, and in that week of classes we are covering something about the legal doctrine that differentiates between a refugee under American law and a political asylee. And it sounds very interesting, and they learn which form you fill for refugee status and which form you fill for political asylee status. And they say, oh, wow, this is very interesting. Can I go and teach this to people? Well, in American law, it would constitute malpractice. Why would it constitute malpractice? Because if you teach people that and only that without knowledge of the entire process, you will end up giving advice to people that will place them in a great amount of legal difficulty in the future. Because it is not just about learning what form to fill for refugee status and what form to fill for political asylum status, but it is also learning the evidentiary standards that apply to both, the exclusions that apply to both, the entire edifice of legal doctrine that is necessary to say anything useful about political asylum. Partial knowledge, and especially when it comes to the Quran, has created an enormous amount of problems for us as Muslims. So, this material that you are learning is for your transformation. So, you change until the point that you've gone through the entire Quran and your teacher says, and the teacher in this case is me, because this material is coming from me, I am satisfied that you have sufficiently mastered this material for you to go from self-improvement to, in fact, instruction. And for me to do that, I would probably test you. I would have effectively an oral exam. I would question you about a variety of things, and if I'm satisfied that you've in fact mastered it, I might say, by Allah's blessings, go and teach. But if I'm not satisfied, I say you don't have my blessings to teach. One of the things that happen to us as Muslims is that we've lost these, while we have these intuitive awareness about teaching medicine or teaching engineering or teaching law, we intuitively know that, you're not going to teach something partial, and you're not going to say that I can teach when it comes to these professional things that are ways to make money. But unfortunately, we've, and again, it's through the history of colonialism and brainwashing that we've gone through, we've lost that type of entire institutional structure. So again, I underscore that the material that you are learning in these halaqas is so that you transform, so that you become your own project, your own student. You now are your most important teacher, and you are your most important student. It might be that after you've acquired enough knowledge, sufficient knowledge, that I would say, okay, I'm satisfied that you've mastered this material enough that you can step into the position of a teacher and start. Because the minute you step in a position of teacher, people will also look at you as an authority, whether you like it or not. And people will give you a certain amount of deference, whether you like it or not. And people will also ask you questions, whether you like it or not. And people will expect answers, whether you like it or not. And even if you tell people, I'm just a transmitter of information. I'm not a teacher. Whether you like it or not, you have placed yourself in a position of authority. And the responsibility is greatest when the knowledge involves revelation. And in fact, the responsibility is not nearly as great when the knowledge involves things other than revelation. Okay? Everyone with me? Jenna's still hiding. That's not Jenna.
It's Jenna. She's coming.
She's coming. She said she's coming. She said she is coming.
Yeah, I read something down there. I'm just picking on her for fun. Oh. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Oh, I was yeah, about this I know that some of you have told me they don't like it when I say this, but I know that I'm not. This is not directed at you guys. This is so that you'll have a 5-minute clip or a 3-minute clip that you can use. I live with this material, and I've lived with this material for a very long time. And things keep happening in life that just constantly remind me how much the Quran has to say to us, and how we as Muslims are so disconnected from our divine, from the Quran. I mean, it is remarkable that we have a living prophet between us, amongst us. The Quran is our living prophet. And it is remarkable the extent to which we ignore that living prophet. And events keep just rolling in our lives, whether it is in our American context, the death toll from coronavirus to Black Lives Matter to what just happened in Wisconsin to the Emirati-Israeli deal, to some people writing saying that Muslims should support Trump, to some people somehow end up blessing the betrayal of the Palestinian people through that Emirati-Israeli deal. I'm talking about the thing I gave a khutbah about, that council of Muslim scholars that work with the Emirat, and Bin Baya and Hamza Yusuf deal and so on. And throughout all of that, what keeps again and again and again just slapping me in the face is the extent to which we are ignorant of the Quran. And because of our just lack of basic education about the Quran, it is very easy for some of us to pluck out a few verses here and there and cite them out of context and win propaganda arguments this way. I mean, it's a completely rhetorical device. But as a living moral agent amongst us, raising our moral consciousness, raising our ethical consciousness, the extent of ignorance about the Quran is just truly dismaying and heartbreaking. And the part that people don't, some people told me they don't like me talking about, is when I say that the burden that I constantly feel is I often think about how long I'm going to be on this earth, and whether I'm going to be on this earth long enough to unload what I'm storing in this brain. And maybe it's just completely unjustified, but I think I am justified in worrying about how much I'm going to get to unload before I leave this world. And again, maybe this is arrogant. I don't know, but I often think that if I go to my grave and I haven't unloaded at least my journey with the Quran, and this is what the thing that makes me come out of the den and go to Grace and start complaining about, I basically tell her little snippets. Did you know that in Surah such and such there is this? And do you know that in Surah such and such there is this? And it's always in the context of, it's going to be very sad if I leave this world and I haven't explained that snippet. And of course, the fact of the matter is that I don't. Again, this is my own perspective. We're not raising, and again, I'm not. You guys might have a different perspective. The people who are actually involved in fundraising, but from my perspective, the raising of funds is not going as fast as I would have liked. So I've already began teaching. I'm already stuck with teaching. At least for the fall semester, possibly for the whole year. And it is really exhausting to teach during so I don't think I'm going to be holding a halaqah every weekend this semester. It's just, I don't know how that would be possible. My appeal to Muslims, I know that I don't want to preach to the converted, the guys who are on the screen, but my appeal to Muslims is just listen to one of these halaqas if you can't listen to all of them. Just visit, even what, you don't have to do Surah Al-Rahman or Surah Yasin because they're longer. If you are convinced that you've never heard this material anywhere else, work to generate the funds so I can unload this knowledge before I leave this earth. I think that's the only way I can put it. Ultimately, I accept whatever Allah wills, but Allah only helps those who help themselves. If are there a lot of scholars and a lot of people that could have benefited the Muslim Ummah, but the Muslim Ummah failed them, and because the Muslim Ummah failed them, Allah took them away? Absolutely. And not just scholars, but prophets. So, Grace sometimes says, well, Allah will never allow you to leave this earth before unloading what you know. Well, that's not true. And I know Grace wants to believe that, but that's not true. There are prophets who Allah allowed to leave this earth because their ummah failed them. And these are prophets. And there are many, many, many great scholars, far greater than I could ever be, who died very young, who were killed, who were jailed, who were tortured, and it was the ummah's failure. So yeah, I mean, I'm accustomed to I'm accustomed to not receiving support, but it just saddens me. It saddens me that if I go to my grave and I have not gone at least through. I mean, there are dreams for the entire Sirah. There are dreams for several other things in Islamic philosophy and so on. But I've even given up on the possibility of getting there. I'll just be happy if I can cover the entire Quran before leaving. Okay. Surah Al-Hijr. Al-Hijr is again a Meccan revelation, one of the transformative surah, or the surah that were revealed in Mecca to sculpt and shape and form the Muslim character. You know, I asked about Jannah, but I don't see Cheyenne.
No, he's there.
Where's Cheyenne? Oh, here he is. Okay. Why aren't they together? Are you guys mad at each other? Okay. Are they okay?
They're fine. I'll do that.
Okay. As long as you're fine. Al-Hijr was revealed after Surah Yusuf. And it's rather interesting because according to the reports we have, there was the Isra and Mi'raj, Surah Al-Isra. Surah Al-Isra was a true test to the face of the early Muslim community, because after Surah Al-Isra, there are those who believed that the Prophet ascended to the heaven and visited Jerusalem and so on, but those whose faith was not as strong and ended up leaving because they refused to believe Al-Isra. So it is as if first we had Surah Al-Isra and a process of cleansing of Muslims of weak faith from Muslims of solid, strong faith. And then right after Surah Al-Isra, we had Surah Yunus, Surah Hud, Surah Yusuf. All three focused on the legacy of prophets. So all three, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet and readying the Prophet for the what is going to come. And basically, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not as if, in fact, it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet, okay, now you've gone through this trial and tribulation, this very difficult test. Many people refused to believe you and left, and the number of converts to Islam is not growing. It had remained. It reached a certain point, and then the numbers remained constant for a while in Mecca. This is, of course, all before the Hijrah, and Allah then teaches the prophets, educates the Prophet ﷺ on the legacy, or the legacy of Hud, Yunus, and Yusuf. Each of these surah telling the Prophet how his own sunnah relates to the sunnah of previous prophets. that in fact it is one continuous message that Allah has been sending with constant and common themes that people who bear a cause to others. It's sort of like the narrative of what happens to those who bring a cause of enlightenment to humanity. And then after the revelation of Hud, Yunus, and Yusuf, you have Surah Al-Hijr. And Surah Al-Hijr, so on the one hand, it is talking to those who remained Muslim, so people who stuck with the Prophet after the night journey, the Isra and Mi'raj. And the night journey, as we said, tested a lot of people who didn't want to believe that the Prophet ascended to heaven and went to Jerusalem and so on, and said, no, this is too far. And in fact, what intensified at that point was the accusations of the Meccans, of the Prophet, accusations of being insane, majnoon, being a sorcerer, a sahir, and so on. But particularly sorcerer and majnoon, and insane. He's insane to say that he's ascended to the heavens and went to Jerusalem. This is craziness, and to the extent that he is showing signs of prophecy, then it must be sorcery. So Surah Al-Hijr then comes at that point telling Muslims something about what is expected to them. Now, when Muslims at this point, they don't know that soon they were going to be migrating and building an entire nation, an entire state when they migrate to Medina. But underscoring to Muslims some of the most basic and essential principles in the way they relate to the Quran and in the way they relate to Islam and the way that they relate to living a life with a cause. Living a life with a cause. So Surah Al-Hijr, which starts with Alif Lam Ra, among the series of surah that start with Alif Lam Ra in the Mecca period, they have a very fascinating characteristic. While speaking to the Prophet ﷺ, so they're directed at the Prophet. They don't say Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. They are speaking to the Prophet Muhammad. But at the same time, what they tell the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ of direct relevance to anyone who wants to follow the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as we will see. So the message is, okay, Muhammad, Allah is telling you, Allah knows what is going on, knows the amount of suffering you are going through, knows the hardship. Allah knows that there are people around you that disappoint you, there are people that support you, there are people that impress you, there are people that don't impress you. Allah knows this entire thing, and Allah has a message to you, but that message transcends being a message to the historical moment of the Prophet's lives, to speaking to and addressing anyone that wants to follow or seeks to follow the Prophet ﷺ as an example in life. As we will see, inshallah. The other thing about Surah Al-Hijr is that personally, for me, Surah Al-Hijr was among the surah that was most impactful in my journey in rereading the Quran and re-understanding the Quran. And as I said before, that it's a journey where you first suspect certain things, and then they grow into convictions, and then they grow into an entire theory and a doctrine, and then the good scholars will often, after learning something, they'll sit on it and let it simmer, like cook, like a good meal. You don't bad scholars, the minute they think they learned something, they rush to announce it to the world, to the world their discovery. And that's why they're constantly publishing. Every few months they have a new book out or a new article out, because they think everything they think of is worth sharing. That's not the way you deep, well-founded scholarship doesn't work that way. Well-founded scholarship, after you even think you've learned something, you sit there and you study it and you test it and retest it and retest it. So Surah Al-Hijr was very instrumental in this process. And why? Two things. Surah Al-Hijr alerts us, as we will see, have we been cut off? To Al-Sab' al-Mathani, and that's the Fatiha, as I'll explain in a second. And so it was one of these surah that flagged for me the importance of the Fatiha as a key to the entire Quran. Second is that magnanimous ayah in Surah Al-Hijr, فَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. Keep worshipping Allah until certitude comes to you. We often say, and it is very common, by the way, and it's a weakness that all human beings share, and we all share. And to say that, well, I'll worship Allah, and I expect Allah to help me in Iman. But the vast majority of human beings, are so impatient that the amount of worship they do, if you take it as a percentage of their life, is very limited, and yet they expect Iman to come to them from the fact that they spent 5 minutes in each salah, 5 and 5, that's 25 minutes a day. The fact that they spent maybe 25 minutes a day praying. Well, why isn't Iman, strong, solid Iman coming to me? Well, Surah Al-Hijr has one of the most important declarations to the Prophet himself, ﷺ, something that we all should learn from, or we are all invited to learn from, about the importance of ibadah, in a word, dhikr, as a way of unveiling knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that you do ibadah and ignore research. You have to, you can't, I mean, so Surah Al-Hijr is the way that convinced at least me in my journey that in the same way you have to be diligent in research. So you have to do your homework. You have to go to read all the tafsir. You can't just ignore the science and say, oh, I'm just going to rely on my own understanding because I'm so brilliant, I'm so gifted. That's delusional. So many of us engage in that delusion. But at the same time, you can't just rely on research and say, well, my scholarship is enough. The path to Allah is through ibadah, and worship Allah until certitude comes to you. So it gave me the dual tools of Al-Fatiha and of dhikr as a means of investigation and study and exploration. But in the same way that Surah Al-Hijr was truly transformative for me in my journey with the Quran, I think Surah Al-Hijr was transformative for those early Muslims at that critical moment after the Isra wal Mi'raj, but before the Hijrah to Medina, build these powerful, strong, solid Muslims that will then go on to impress us as they build an entire state in Medina. And it starts out Alif Lam Ra, and as we said, we don't want to get into what these letters mean. I'll just, and I don't remember if I said this before, but some have suggested that Alif Lam Ra is the beginning part of Ar-Rahman. So you have Alif Lam Ra, and then other surahs start with Hamim, and then another surah start with Noon. If you put them all together, they spell out Ar-Rahman. And there are many other different. Some of the theories are very esoteric about what Alif Lam Ra mean. But again, I think I mentioned before that Alif Lam, it's part of a series of 7 surahs that start with this configuration, Alif Lam Ra. Okay, Alif Lam Ra. Before I do that, let me tell you like other Surah Al-Hijr follows that same structure that we've talked about, where it has 5 or 6 parts, depending on how you count it. The first part number 1, is a clear declaration, in the same way that the Fatiha starts with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Surah Al-Hijr starts with the clear declaration of an unwavering truth. A truth that is the beginning, the starting point for everything. And that truth, in the case of Surah Al-Hijr, as ذلك الكتاب تلك آيات الكتاب والقرآن المبين. This is the clear, truthful, reliable, unwavering Quran. This is where the locus of the truth is. So number 1 is a declaration about the truth itself and the relationship of the Quran to truth. Then it moves, number 2, the second part, it moves to addressing the Prophet ﷺ directly, and the trials and difficulties of people not believing the Prophet. That's the second part. Third part, it takes the Prophet ﷺ into a journey about creation and nature, which we've seen again in a constant theme. Fourth part, it goes back into a history lesson, nature and history. We always see the Quran bringing up nature and history in order to educate the soul and the intellect in their relationship with Allah. So the fourth part is the history of past nations. The fifth part, it comes back to the idea of the cause and speaking to the Prophet about his mission and about the very principle of people living with a cause. What does it mean to live with a cause? And you don't, it doesn't, as we will see, I mean, it could be just living a principled life. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you are, an activist or an advocate or someone that wants to change the world. It could be simply that you want to live a principled life and you just don't want to drift like others drift. And then the sixth part, or it depends on how you count, but it's either 5 parts or 6 part. But arguably the sixth part would be a declaration about the straight path. And we'll see and we've seen that basic structure, which, I mean, if inshallah, if I get the opportunity to train some of you personally, then we will be able to explore how the Fatiha gives you the keys to open up, to unlock each of these surah and understand the basic narrative structure of each surah. Okay, so the surah starts with something that grabs your attention and a powerful, unwavering declaration about this book itself. And it tells you right out, this Quran, this book is there for Ibana. Ayat Kitab al-Mubin. Tilka ayat al-Quran al-Mubin. That Ibana is what clarifies and distinguishes and differentiates truth from untruth. This is like the first step. You have to believe that this book can reveal the truth to you. If you don't believe it, like the Isra and Mi'raj, it's either you believe the Prophet when he tells you, I've ascended to the heavens and went to Jerusalem, or you don't believe. If you choose to believe, fine. If you choose not to believe, then you can't be a Muslim. So immediately Surah Al-Hijr comes and like grabs your attention and says, okay, listen, there's no wavering about this. It's either you believe in this book as the word of truth, or you don't. This is something that makes it or breaks it as a deal. If you're not willing to accept this, then this is a deal breaker. Then there is no point. There is, saying I'm not sure or yes and no. And as we will see for Surah Al-Hijr, this is really important. Wavering and being wishy-washy, we're not going to get anywhere. Now, why is it so important that Surah Al-Hijr underscores that foundational issue? Because Surah Al-Hijr is going to challenge you, or is going to, I'm trying to find the right word, emphasize or underscore or just set as a foundational point that there are so many people that approach the truth with wavering convictions, shaken beliefs, that and those same people will often approach the truth through a partial gaze that is often self-serving. But those people are doomed to failure. So, and I'm going to clarify this, and as we see, we go on that journey with Surah Al-Hijr, that you have to commit yourself to embracing a methodology of not segmenting and compartmentalizing the truth. You have to commit yourself to embracing the entire message of the Quran. If you want to live as a principled human being or as a person with a cause, it cannot be that you are with a principle at times when it serves your interests, or when you feel like it, or when you're in the mood, or when you manage to resist Shaitaan, and not with the principle at other times. A principled life is a full commitment to what is the word I'm looking for? A principled life is a full commitment that requires a conscientiousness that is constantly ongoing, as we will see, and this will become clear. I'm not expressing it too well or explaining it too well right now. Okay, so تلك آيات القرآن المبين. This is the truth. Then it takes you to a shocking second statement. Perhaps those who are kuffar الذين كفروا ربما يود الذين كفروا لو كانوا مسلمين. Perhaps the kuffar will wish that they are Muslim. And this, in the same way that it gave pause to the early Muslims, it gives pause to Mufassirun over centuries, it gives pause to any engaged reader of the Quran. What do you mean that the kuffar would wish to be Muslim? And perhaps, ربما, perhaps the kuffar will wish to be Muslim. At the time of the revelation, at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Meccans mocked this declaration and said, this translation says, it may be that those who disbelieve will wish that they have submitted. It's very interesting the way they translated. I'll explain why they translated it this way. No, that's not what it says. What it says is, perhaps those who are kuffar, الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, those who are kuffar, will wish to be Muslim. So, and the kuffar of Mecca mocked that and said, well, if we wanted to be Muslim, we would be Muslim. What do you mean, perhaps we would wish to be Muslim? The tafsir books, when they looked at this, they said, well, the way this would make sense is that if it's talking about the hereafter, that the time will come when after you, in the hereafter, those who were kuffar, when they see that they're going to go to hell and they're going to be punished, they're going to say, we wish we were Muslim. And that's why you have that translation. They would perhaps, or it may be that those who disbelieve will wish that they had submitted. The way that the translation puts it, it gives you the sense that it's talking about the hereafter. That it's talking about the hereafter, and that they will regret what they've done. But if you look at the context of the revelation, ربما يود الذين كفروا لو كانوا مسلمين ذرهم يأكلوا ويتمتعوا ويلههم الأمل فسوف يعلمون. And then it moves on about إهلاك قيرة وما أهلكنا من قرية إلا ولها كتاب معلوم, and so on. So if it is talking about the hereafter, why that word ربما? It may be, or perhaps. If it is talking about the hereafter, what it says, okay, so let them play and frolic, and يلهيهم الأمل, which we'll talk about, and be fooled by wishfulness. They will know. Well, it is not a matter of whether Allah says it may be or perhaps. The kuffar, according to the Quran, in the hereafter, certainly, for sure, are going to be in a state of regret. So much of the Quran tells us this, right? That once you see the punishment, if you have not led a good life, once you see what's going to happen to you in the hereafter, there's no maybe and there's no perhaps. In fact, you will be in a state of regret. So why is it that Surah Al-Hijr starts out with ربما, perhaps, or it may be? This is why a lot of Mufassirun said, no, this can't be talking about the hereafter. And in fact, the reaction of Meccans at the time of the Prophet ﷺ in mocking this ayah and saying, what do you mean perhaps we want to be Muslim? Is a further indication that it was understood as saying something other than simply the hereafter. I will come back to this because I can't give you the answer as to what it means until we've covered more of the surah. Because it would become very clear why, in fact, when it says it may be that the kuffar will wish that they are Muslim, it is saying something really important. Not just, I don't agree with those who said that it is talking about just the hereafter, because the Quran has talked about regret and kufr in the hereafter in many, many other occasions, and it never has a tentative or a conditional attached to it. It is always asserted as a matter of certitude. So we'll come back to this. No, you know what? I'm gonna give you a little bit more about this because I think it will help you. So, for instance, Al-Maturidi, one of the great theologians of Islam and who has a very influential Quranic tafsir, said that when in Surah Al-Hijr, in this ayah, when the ayah says that perhaps they will wish to be Muslims, or it may be that the relationship of human beings to truth is not a black and white relationship. Truth comes to you and leaves you. It visits you and eludes you. So Al-Mutaridi, I'm just going to say it in Arabic first and then I'll explain it. يود أحد الكفار في أوقات يظهر لهم الحق لكن الذي يمنعهم فوات حاجة من حاجات الدنيا. That it is in fact the truth that those who do not believe have periods or instances or situations they find themselves in where the truth comes through to them and flashes before them, and they might see it just for an instant. But because of intervening reasons, whether these reasons are often, according to Maturidi, when he says haja min hajat dunya, that because of material selfishness, they decide to turn away from that truth. But in the context of Surah Al-Hijr, the reason this is so important is what Surah Al-Hijr is telling you about the relationship, our relationship to the Quran, our relationship to a cause, our relationship to the truth, is that we often segment and yield the truth to our own whims, rather than make a comprehensive, total commitment to a cause and way of life, as we will see. So, in fact, when it says, يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْ كَانُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ, and there's still more to say about this that I'm saving. But that, in fact, there are moments, fleeting moments, that even the kuffar, and especially as we will see when the Quran at moments penetrates through to their hearts, and they see the truth for a glimpse, but they allow the truth to slip away. And it's telling the Prophet ﷺ something very important about the nature of being a human being with a cause. People will gather around you like some gathered around you, and then the minute the Isra and al-Mi'raj came, they left. Because unless people make a thorough and coherent commitment to the truth, they are plagued by hypocrisy and plagued by contradictions. And these contradictions will be their undoing, as we will see. So, after telling the Prophet ﷺ, this book, pay attention, because this book is the truth. Second, know that even the kuffar that are giving you such a hard time now, that have caused you so much torment for you and your wife Khadija and your family Ali and your friends and your Abu Bakr and Umar and others that are caught, even those, it is not all black and white. They can see glimpses of the truth that escape them. And as we'll see, the punchline that the surah is saving for the end is even more powerful about يَوَدُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْ كَانُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. What is what is the constant reason for failure? The surah gives you the answer at the beginning and then gives you the answer again at the end. And what is that answer? يُلْهِهُمُ الْأَمَلِ. This is a very important Quranic expression. Most of the people that never manage to live a life that is in good standing with God is because they have been misled by hopefulness. They tell themselves, whether this hopefulness is, well, if there is a hereafter, I'm sure Allah is forgiving. I'm sure Allah will. Or, I do believe in a hereafter, but I'm really hoping that Allah will overlook my sins. I don't want to make a full commitment because it's too hard. Okay, how about the fact that you know by not making a full commitment, you are failing in so many things? Well, you know, God is loving and merciful and it will be okay. Hopefulness, that's yulhihumul amal. Whereas the surah is telling us, and it's teaching the Prophet ﷺ and teaching the believers something really important that we have for centuries ignored. Surah Al-Hijr, as we will see, inshallah, is saying it is not that people are evil sworn enemies. People are often just wishful. And it's sad, it's tragic, but know that, O Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, that those who betrayed Hud, Yunus and Yusuf, those who left you after Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, those who are going to abandon you after Khadija dies, those who are not going to migrate with you, in other words, all the failures that you are going to see, and as we will see in Surah Al-Hijr, all the failures that are breaking your heart, it's because people don't commit to the total and whole truth. They commit to what they like. And they live wishful lives. And taking Allah for granted in that way is not okay. Because to live a wishful life, you have to take Allah for granted. Yeah, it's like, saying, oh, it's like, I'm going to cheat on my wife and she'll forgive me. Well, if you're a wife or a husband with dignity, you say, you can't take me for granted like that. You can't just assume I'm going to forgive you. I mean, who are you? Now imagine if we as human beings don't like to be taken for granted. We think it's humiliating. If someone insults you and just assumes that you're going to forgive, you're being taken for granted and you think it's an affront to your dignity. Well, how about Allah? And how many of us do this with Allah all the time? We just assume that Allah will be okay. Oh, Allah will be fine. What we're doing is that we just don't want to confront it. So we just escape confronting it by failing to make a total commitment to the path, to the straight path, to Sirat al-Mustaqim, as we will see. Now, why is this education really important for the Prophet ﷺ? Because the recipe Surah Al-Hijr is going to give the Prophet ﷺ, as we will see, is what do you do about it? فَغْفِرْ وَصْفَحْ. Forgive and turn away. Pity these people. Don't hate them. It is not your... Even when eventually There are going to be battles fought. The command of the Quran is consistently to the Prophet ﷺ is, even when you are forced to go to war with these people, you have constant compassion for them and a constant sincere desire that they see the truth and sadness that they fail to do so. Not hate, not anger, not rancor. As we will see, some theologians who are fond of saying that the verse on the sword, ayat al-sayf, abrogated the ayat of forgiveness in Surah Al-Hijr. We will get there, but that argument is clearly wrong, in my opinion. The Surah Al-Hijr was one of the foundational surah that is formative for the Muslim character as to what the right ethical approach is. It is a constitutional surah, not a surah to be abrogated. But you know, those who followed the imperial Islam types are the ones who. Sorry, I have to go faster with Surah Al-Hijr because Can we take a 2-minute bathroom break? Three minutes. Count 3 minutes.
No, no rush.
Okay, I'm gonna give you like a 1 minute clip that you can cut and post separately. Okay, so here's 1 minute clip. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. يا أمة الإسلام يا مسلمين, Muslims out there everywhere. I am a man who, for as long as I know, Allah, when I was born as a very sick and ill baby, as I grew up, there are two things that I fell in love with. I fell in love with beauty. I've always loved beauty. Al-Jamal wal-Ihsan. And because I fell in love with beauty, I fell in love with the Quran. Please give me the opportunity to share with you my journey with the Quran. Please give me the opportunity to share with you what I've learned about the beauty of this book. For whatever it's worth, give me the opportunity to offer it. The beauty of this book is unparalleled. What it has to tell us and what it has to teach us is the core of our identity and the core of our moral consciousness and the core of our moral compass. Without it, we are nothing. Without it, we are not a people, we are not an ummah, we are not even Muslims. We are a shadow. We are a shabah. And a shadow comes and goes, it evaporates and appears. It has no reality to it. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Okay. So after that penultimate statement that it opens up with, grabs our attention and says, okay, pay attention, I'm going to teach you something really important here. Surah Al-Hijr then moves immediately to tell us something about the relationship of Allah to humanity. وَمَا أَهْلَكْنَا مِنْ قَرْيَةٍ إِلَّا وَلَهَا كِتَابٌ مَعْلُومٌ ما تسبق من أمة أجلها وما يستأخرون وقالوا يا أيها الذي نزل عليه الذكر إنك لمجنون لو ما تأتينا بالملائكة إن كنت من الصادقين ما ننزل الملائكة إلا بالحق وما كانوا إذا منظرين إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون ولقد أرسلنا من قبلك في شيع الأولين وما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون كذلك نسلكه في قلوب المجرمين لا يؤمنون به وقد خلت سنة الأولين ولو فتحنا عليهم بابا من السماء فظلوا فيه يعرجون لقالوا إنما سكرت أبصارنا بل نحن قوم مسحورون ولقد جعلنا في السماء بروجا وزيناها للناظرين. So it takes us immediately up to Ayah 15, verse 15, saying what? First, telling us you have to understand that this creation has an owner, has a malik. And this malik, this owner, this Rabb, controls the evolution and development of history. History is an educator, but it is not an haphazard educator. It doesn't just unfold for solely material reasons that are impulse and reaction, but in fact, it is directed. And that understand that the rise and destruction of people follows a logic, a divinely dictated logic, and a divinely dictated time. So you, prophet of God, and you believers of that prophet of God, understand that if there is success, if there is victory, it will be from God. And if there is failure, it doesn't unfold because God is oblivious or unknowing. In fact, failure and victory is part and parcel of the involvement of the divine. Notice that after verse 4 and 5, saying that clearly asserting God's involvement in which nations rise and which nations fall, it takes us in verse 6, وَقَالُوا يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِي نُزِّلَ عَلَيْهِ الذِّكْرُ إِنَّكَ لَمَجْنُونَ. They say to you, prophet, you are insane. إِنَّكَ لَمَجْنُونَ. And you say to yourself, well, wait, why did it have to assert or powerfully remind the prophet that failure and success comes from God, and at the same time immediately say to him, they call you insane, and we know Allah knows that they call you insane. Go back to this idea of a person was a cause and a person was a principle. You who live a principled life, you who live a life with a cause, you, prophet of God, the reaction of people to truth, to principle, is when it challenges them and defies them, is to simply say, okay, you're an idiot. To undermine your credibility. They often, the only thing that they can accuse you of is, oh, you just don't make sense. Oh, you're just not, I just don't believe you. إِنَّكَ لَمَجْنُونَ sums it up. It doesn't mean that they are accusing you of have no rational faculties. They're accusing you of not making sense. Expect this. And not only expect this, that when people challenge those who live with principle and with a cause and with a conviction, they will say, well, we believe in material existence, material things we can see and feel. And if you really wanted to win us over, well, show us material proof by having these angels come appear in front of us. Angels here, it means for the belief in the unseen, belief in ghaib. If you're really truthful, if you really want us to believe that you are not insane, you're not crazy, then have these ethereal beings become material beings so we can see it. In other words, yield to the logic of materialism. Yield to the logic of materialism. But then, immediately, the Quran tells us, you know what? You have to understand that it is not about physical, material manifestations. It is about the psychology of people. There are people that, regardless of what proof you show them, they're not going to believe. So much so that then it tells us that even if Allah would take them and have them travel through the heavens, لو فتحنا عليهم بابا من السماء فظلوا فيه يعرجون, that even if Allah would make them travel to the heavens and they would see the throne of God, they would still disbelieve. How would they disbelieve? They would say, نحن قوم مسحورون. They would say, oh, it must have been hallucination. So know that there are people that are simply not going to believe you. And they're going to call you crazy. And they're going to denounce your lifestyle. And they're going to denounce your cause. And they're going to denounce your principle. And they're going to do that because they're committed to disbelief. They're committed to their own way of life, which is, a material way of life, a life that is based on consumption and enjoyment, and a life that is based on existence on this earth and nothing beyond this earth, and that they are so committed that even when Allah, or if Allah shows them signs that might invite them at times to wish they were Muslim or to want to be Muslim, they are going to find a way to say it didn't really happen. Oh, it was just a hallucination. Oh, it was just a dream. oh, it was just, you know, the mind is a powerful thing that would make you see things that are not there. So it is not about material physical existence or proof. In this context, I just have to point your attention to ayah number 9. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. This is taken as a promise by Allah that, as different from or compared to or in contrast to the Torah and the Injil, the earlier revelations, which have been corrupted, they were not preserved. They were recorded hundreds of years after the death of their prophets, and because they were recorded hundreds of years after the death of the prophet, the dhikr of Musa and Isa and other prophets were not preserved. But the dhikr of Muhammad, the dhikr here means the revelation, the Quran of Muhammad, Allah promised to preserve it. And so if you look in books of tafsir, you find a great deal written about how this was a promise that the Quran would be preserved, unaltered, and uncorrupted, and so on. But it's also sends us a message that is saying, there are people who are just not going to believe in the Quran. And it doesn't matter to what extent you show them that the Quran was preserved, they're just not going to believe. And subhanAllah, of course, we see that if you are in the field of Quranic studies and you see, unfortunately, what some Muslims who go to Western universities and especially, departments of religion, and, then they buy into some very weird arguments about Syriac and Aramaic and the influence of Syriac and Aramaic on the Quran, and they come up with these very contorted and forced theories, all to argue that the Quran is not authentically preserved. You see the truth of this revelation. Okay, so an interesting footnote here when it says وَقَالُوا يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِي نُزِّلَ عَلَيْهِ الذِّكْرُ إِنَّكَ لَمَجْنُونَ, when it says that they call you insane, a number of Quranic commentators, among them Imam al-Mataridi, note that part of the reason that they're called that they accuse you of being crazy, al-Mataridi and a number of other theologians say that this is because people who believe in this cause, like Muhammad ﷺ and like all the prophets, يظهرون الخلاف للفراعنة والجبابرة, that part and parcel of this cause is defying tyrants. والفراعنة والجبابرة يقتلون من يخالفهم, and tyrants are in the practice of killing and torturing those who defy them. And that for most people to go up against tyrants is a form of insanity. So note here, what are the implications of this? In our modern language, is defying power. It's very significant that at the same time that you see all these Muslims these days who tell you that our relationship to power, political power, should be submission and obedience. You should, in the Islamic tradition, there are many who believed that the essence of Islam is defying tyrants, and that for the common person who lives without a cause, well, the way you should deal with power is to befriend power, not defy power. And this is my understanding of the Quran is that there is no way that you can befriend and absorb the Quran in your heart and live and accept the corruptions of power as just and right. If the Quran penetrates your heart, your relationship with power will be either defiance or at a minimum distance. That is why, for me, any person that claims religious authority or positions himself or herself as an expert in Islamic sciences and is close to the annals and institutions of power, for me, lacks credibility. Their credibility is suspect. To honor principles and ethics, at a minimum, you must maintain distance from power and the corruptions of power, if not outright defy it. And so it is interesting that at least the way, because this is something that has been obfuscated in Islamic history, Muhammad was seen as a man who defied the institutions of power in Mecca. And because he defied the institutions of power and stood with the powerless, he was accused of being crazy. But this is precisely the point, that if you also look at the Quranic revelation about the story of the prophets from beginning to end, all these prophets stood in defiance to the corruptions of power and suffered as a result. I mean, many of them paid very dearly for that. Now, note in verse 12, again, another thing that deserves a pause. So, note it says, كَذَلِكَ نُسْلِكُهُ فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. This is translated as, thus we place it into the hearts of the guilty. Now, if you are studying the Quran carefully, you pause and you say, wait, we've sent the dhikr, the Quran, and we will protect it. وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. And we've a repeated story that we send the truth, and people defy the truth, and they deny the truth, and in fact, there are some people so committed to not seeing the truth that even if we took them up in the heavens, they would still deny it and say we hallucinated. So when this verse says كَذَلِكَ نُسْلِكُهُ فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُجْرِمِينَ, so that thus we place it in the hearts of the guilty. Place what? What is it talking about? What is it that is placed in the hearts of the guilty? Is it saying that what we place in the hearts of the guilty is defiance of the truth? In other words, that they want to disbelieve, so God says, okay, fine, then I will help you disbelieve, and defiance of the truth is placed in their heart? Or is it saying something else? Now note here, and this is when we talk about the eloquence of the Quran and just this is precisely the type of things we mean. The use of the word nuslikuhu. Nuslikuhu doesn't mean place. It doesn't mean something that is placed in the heart. It means something that passes through the heart. So if you wanted, salaka shay means to pass through something. So what is it that passes through the heart? Remember this beginning of the surah. Perhaps those who disbelieve would wish to be Muslims. The truth visits the hearts of the disbelievers, but it doesn't settle there. It doesn't nest. All of you, this is again educating the Prophet and Muslims about the nature of truth. The truth visits the hearts of all types of people. And whether it nests or doesn't nest depends on what you do with it. Most people, the truth comes to them, tickles them, grabs their attention momentarily, but then eludes them, escapes them. That's what nuslikuhu is. It comes and passes through. And because they fail to make the commitment, it is not that they make a commitment to falsehood. No. It is that they fail to make a commitment to truthhood. Because they fail to make a commitment to truthhood, they remain confused. And because they remain confused, they are susceptible to convincing themselves that they didn't see the truth. So if they rise up in the heavens, they're going to say, oh, we hallucinated it. When you say we hallucinated it, it's not that you are committed to falsehood. You are committed to confusion. You are committed to being lost. That's what Surah Al-Hijr is telling you. Now, it's time for me to give you a little reveal. As we will see, this surah is called Al-Hijr. This begs the question, what is Al-Hijr? As we will see, the word Hijr occurs in the surah, but it occurs in a context of referring to a valley. For years, I wanted to understand why the surah was called Al-Hijr. If it just refers to the valley in which the Qawm Salih lived, it doesn't make sense, because the surah could have been called any other thing. So I did dhikr on it, I prayed on it, and I prayed on it. And then I remembered in the course of these prayers something very important. The Quran itself tells us in a different surah, هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي حِجْرٍ. The Quran itself reminds us in a different surah by using the word hijr, but it uses the word hijr to mean intellect. So this valley, and we will see, and I'll show you in a second inshallah, but this valley is the valley of intellect. That valley, that wadi, Hijr, as we said, the Quran uses to mean intellect. It became clearer and clearer to me that this surah is telling you what is the nature of your intellect. Is it a valley that you can inhabit with truth and a cause and a principled life? Or is it a valley of the lost and the wasted? Surah Al-Hijr is a challenge, as we will see in more detail. Okay. So, it's disciplining and educating and raising the Prophet ﷺ and those who believe, those Muslims who are going to carry a huge burden, the burden of the Islamic message, and saying, listen, don't expect that, don't understand there are a lot of people who are committed to being lost in life. They're confused, they're lost, and they are addicted to being lost. And truth will come to them and elude them. And they have the capability to convince themselves of anything that keeps them lost. Because people do become addicted to misery and also addicted to confusion. It then takes us to وَلَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا وَزَيَّنَّاهَا لِلنَّاظِرِينَ. Now it's going to take us to talk about nature, and I'll tell you why it talks about nature in a second. This is verse 16. We created planets and stars in the heavens and the skies, but then before it goes on about nature, it tells you, you know what? These heavens are protected from Shaitaan, from demons. وحفظناها من كل شيطان رجيم إلا من استرق السمع فاتبعه شهاب مبين. So the demons might attempt to, let's see how they translate it. We have preserved them from every Satan outcast, save a Satan who gains a hearing by stealth, and then manifest flaming star pursues them. Again, if you are studying the Quran carefully, you'd say, wait, I'm being taught about the truth and confusion, and I'm going to be reminded of how Allah created everything. Why am I having an intermission, an interlude about how that there are demons who might try to listen to the heavens and they are chased away by burning comets or asteroids or whatever it is? Why? Here's the answer. It was an old Near Eastern belief that there was a very heavy reliance on fortune tellers and soothsayers. If you wanted to do anything, you wanted to get married, you wanted to have children, you wanted to do business, you go to a fortune teller and you say, you pay them obviously, and you say, tell me, should I do this, should I do that, and so on. And it was also a belief that demons find out something about the future, about destiny, about what's going to unfold, and they go and are in league with fortune tellers to tell fortune tellers about things. And that is the way that fortune tellers sometimes can tell you something about the future. The Quran in Surah Al-Hijr and elsewhere demanded that Muslims alter what used to be a significant part of their culture. In the same way maybe that electronics or texting is a part of our culture. The Quran, this was as important in their culture. And it basically came and is saying, from now on, truth comes from this book, comes from revelation, comes from the prophet, comes from your intellect, comes from studying physical nature, the laws of nature. No longer does it come from superstitious, or what we would call superstition, means like fortune tellers and demons. That door, Islam declared to be closed. And it was a revolution in the culture of these people. So that later on the Quran even says, you know what? Even when fortune tellers say the truth, they're lying. Because although they might give you a fact, tomorrow your brother will have an accident, and it might come true, but that the reference system for that fact is untrue. In other words, that the logic for existence upon which a fortune teller relies in giving you that fact is a lie. So, for instance, if you translate to our modern age, fortune tellers will tell you there is a God of the south and a God of the north, and a God of the west and east, and that these gods are there. Fortune tellers will tell you, oh, my spiritual guide whispers in my ears, and this is how I hear the dead. Fortune tellers will tell you that there is the God of earth, the God of wind, the God of sea, the God of... fortune tellers, if you watch any of these crazy programs about, like Amy, what's the program called?
I don't remember. Paranormal something.
Yeah, the paranormal shows. You might get a little bit of truth, but the total picture is a lie. So, you can be easily misled because you're getting little facts, or what could turn out to be facts, but you're not getting the essential metaphysical truth about the non-material world. And so when the Quran said this, it was also saying to them, listen, truth doesn't come from your fate being decided by the stars and the constellations, because also the old Near Easterns very much believed in the influence of star constellations upon your life. This is what you say, what's your horoscope? Scorpio, whatever, these things. For Near Easterns at that time, it was an essential part of life. The constellations influenced you. The Quran came and abrogated all of that and took people to a new phase in rationality and belief. No, it's not constellations anymore. This is not where the truth comes from. Sometimes on Egyptian TV, they actually invite fortune tellers that advise people on what the constellations, how the constellations affect their life. And I'm like listening to this and I say, oh my God, you've gone back to Jahiliyyah. You've regressed all the way back to Jahiliyyah. Because the Quran came and told you, no, that's not how you deal with the challenges of your life. You don't turn to superstitions like the constellations. Is it possible, by the way, and this is, if we were doing the interactive things, meaning the students who are living and working with me, I would have told you much more about this. But is it possible for demons to actually sneak and overhear something and come back and work with a fortune teller? In other words, risk being chased by fire, but manage to steal a little bit of information. Yes, it is possible. And it happens all the time. But it's an ongoing battle that we are not aware of. We live our lives unaware of it. And you shouldn't be aware of it. Yeah, it is for crazy people like me to study but then for rational people like you to completely ignore and not engage. Okay.
What does that mean for us living here?
Anyway, my wife is so scared of this stuff that when I go and like when I'm overflowing with information and I want to share, I never share the stuff with her. So,
You go to Sharif.
well, Sharif could handle it, but I don't. I usually don't go. So some of it is just you can't talk to people about stuff that. Anyway. Now, note then, the Quran then takes you in a journey about nature. Why does the Quran take you into a journey about nature? Remember that Surah Al-Hijr is a commitment to the holistic truth and total truth, and a systematic and committed way of life, and to understand that this creation, again, that same thing, that this creation has an owner, that if you reflect upon this creation, so it says, وَأَرْسَلْنَا الرِّيَاحَ لَوَاقِحَ فَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَأَسْقَيْنَاكُمُوهُ وَمَا أَنْتُمْ لَهُ بِخَازِنِينَ. Excuse me. When it says we've sent, how did this guy translate it? Wait, 22. And we sent forth the winds fertilizing, and we sent down water from the sky. I just want to say that for a lot of Quranic commentators were speculated about what the Quran means by the wind fertilizing, because it is only centuries later in the modern age that we learned that in fact the wind does act to carry pollen to fertilize plants. But for the Quranic commentators for centuries, it's very interesting to read all the different theories that they proposed as to what could be the possible meaning of we've sent the wind as fertilizing. In the modern age, we can place that in context much better than in the pre-moderns. Those who often talk about the scientific miracles of the Quran, this is one of the ayat that they point to. وَإِنَّا لَنَحْنُ نُحْيِي وَنُمِيتُ وَنَحْنُ الْوَارِثُونَ. So, after pointing your attention to nature, it comes back to a theme. This is verse 23. It comes back to a constant theme of the total holistic truth that the Quran is teaching you. When all is said and done, it is Allah that remains. وَنَحْنُ الْوَارِثُونَ, and we are the inheritors. Now, why does it underscore that? Well, look at 24. وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْنَا الْمُسْتَقْدِمِينَ مِنْكُمْ وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْنَا الْمُسْتَأْخِرِينَ إِنَّ رَبَّكَ هُوَ يَحْشُرُهُمْ إِنَّهُ حَكِيمٌ عَلِيمٌ. So, we know al-mustaqdimin wal-musta'khirin. I want to see how they translated it. 24. This is 24. And we indeed know those among you who advance, and we indeed know those who lag behind. Yeah, al-mustaqdimin wal-musta'khirin, meaning we have total knowledge of those who came before and those who will come after. And when all is said and done, we are the inheritors. Now, there is a very critical point here, and that Surah Al-Hijr will underscore. If Allah is not the inheritor, and if there is no accountability, this life is meaningless. The only thing that gives life meaning is, in fact, that there is an inheritor and there is accountability. And we will see that in a second. Understand that either you commit to a meaningful life which has an end and has an owner and has an inheritor and has consequences, or you will be in a confused state where you're not sure why you exist at all and why you came to this earth, because there is no inheritor. So you can't say my existence is purposeful. It could be just mere coincidence or an accident. I am coincidence. Well, if you're coincidence, then you're also lacking any meaning. Okay. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِنْ حَمَإٍ مَسْنُونٍ. We've created human beings from clay. وَالْجَانَّ خَلَقْنَاهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ مِنْ نَارِ السُّمُومِ. And jinn were created before human beings from smokeless fire. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي خَالِقٌ بَشَرًا مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِنْ حَمَإٍ مَسْنُونٍ فإذا سويته ونفخت فيه من روحي فقعوا له ساجدين فسجد الملائكة كلهم أجمعين إلا إبليس أبى أن يكون من الساجدين قال يا إبليس ما لك ألا تكون من الساجدين قال لم أكن أسجد لبشر خلقته من صلصال من حمأ مسنون قال فاخرج منها فإنك رجيم وإن عليك اللعنة إلى يوم الدين قال رب فانظرني إلى يوم يبعثون. So now it takes us, it's going to, your life has a purpose. 40 minutes? Okay. But your life is purposeful and meaningful. Then it takes you to that critical moment of Iblis and the story of the prostration before Adam and Iblis's defiance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Note here I wrote myself a note that I forgot to tell you about. Another thing about the reference in Surah Al-Hijr to the sky and to the stars and heavens. at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, just so you know that, people who like to pontificate and pretend that they're experts, it's an ailment of the human soul that existed even at the time of the Prophet. You'd think, just think about it. The Prophet is living right there, but if you have the disease of, I like to be looked at as an authority, it's going to act out even if the Prophet is there. So at the time that the Prophet was there in Mecca, there were a group of people who would get together and study the Quran, what was revealed by the time, and they said that it is haram to look at the heavens, and that idea spread among them, that it is haram to look at the heavens, it is haram to reflect upon the heavens, that and the Quran, part of what Surah Al-Hijr did is that it came and basically told these people, no, Allah wants you to look at the heavens and reflect upon the heavens. I've always thought it's interesting because, you'd think that if the Prophet is right there, it would be easy. Just go ask the Prophet. But no, these people wanted to, like the human ego always draws you to pontificate, even about things that you don't know. More recently, I heard someone who's seen as an authority among Muslims in a lecture, when I could hear in the old days, just a year ago. And he was giving a talk, and then he was mocking Muslims that when they do dua, they look at the heavens, and he's saying, "Oh well, how do you know where are the heavens? Because the earth is circular. So how do you know what's up and down?" And I thought to myself, this guy is looked at as an authority among American Muslims. What an idiot! All you have to do is read the Quran and know that looking at the heavens and reflecting upon the heavens is an entirely legitimate thing. Anyway, so maybe certain things just don't change. Where is the... when in ayah number 20, when how did he translate ayah number 20, which says, "We place there a means of livelihood and for you and for those for whom you provide not." This is the important thing about this ayah, is that earth and sustenance on earth, you have a right for what Allah gives you. But when it says, how do you put it? And for whom you provide not, وَمَنْ لَسْتُمْ لَهُ بِرَازِقِينَ, this is a reference to animals, living creatures on earth. Their rizq is an entitlement from Allah. So among the things that when I was praying, when I reached ayah 20, I saw clearly, at least to me, and Allahu A'lam, from Madadullah, that you do not have a right to deny other living creatures their sustenance, their rizq from Allah. You can't come and destroy nature and deny birds or insects or animals, whatever animals are living in, and say, well, it's all just human need. the earth, whenever you do, you have to respect the risk of non-humans that share the earth with you. For those of you who are interested in Islamic environmentalism, I point your attention to, even if you read the commentators on ayah number 20, you'll see that centuries ago, commentators were saying, when it says, وَمَنْ لَسْتُمْ لَهُ بِرَازِقِينَ, it's talking about birds and animals and living creatures. Well, if Allah says you have a right, but they have a right, then the challenge is to figure out how to share that right justly and fairly. There is a little footnote again about ayah 20, is that the Meccans, among the things they responded to a man with a cause, and not just the Prophet, but also some of the followers of the Prophet. They would consistently say, listen, you are an orphan, we helped raise you, we helped take care of you, and we helped clothe you and feed you. And this is the way you repay us? By defying our institutions of power and coming and telling us about your ethics and your principles? And when Al-Hijr was revealed, Muslims cited ayah number 20 in responding to these people and saying, you don't have a right and tamunnu alayna. You don't have, just because you kindly helped take care of us as members of your society, it doesn't mean that you have a right to silence us when it comes to a commitment to the truth. And this is like a little footnote about the seerah that I've never seen in any published book other than, classical texts, old medieval texts. It's a wonderful point, and a point that we confront all the time, and I don't understand why it was ignored by Muslims. Okay. We come to the defiance of Bliss. When Allah then takes us to the narrative about Iblis, Shaitaan, defying Allah by saying, you've created me from smokeless fire and created this guy or these people from clay. Fire is clearly superior to clay because, as some of the Quranic commentators note, that fire, if applied to clay, that's how you get pottery. And so fire shapes and molds clay. Clay doesn't affect fire. So how can you ask me to prostrate or order me to prostrate before the clay? I'm looking for a quote. I don't remember if I wrote it down or not. Okay, I didn't write it down, but it's okay. It was a nice quote from Imam Al-Hasan radiyallahu anh about this, but I'm blanking out, and apparently I didn't write it. But anyway, so there are two major sins that Shaitaan commits. One, which I've talked about before in different contexts, I gave a khutbah about it, what we call the sin of racism. I am superior to Adam because I am of a substance and Adam of a different substance, and my substance, my nature, is superior to that nature. We call that, in our modern language, racism. And because of this racism, Allah is clearly angry at Shaitaan. But there's a further point, and a point that's very important for Surah Al-Hijr. What is it that induces Shaitaan's racism? Why does Shaitaan... Yes, Shaitaan has an ego problem, and the ego is huge. And because of the ego, Shaitaan refuses to submit. And we know that the ego is the cause for confusion and loss and defiance throughout humanity, throughout history. But what is it that feeds the ego? And why is that important for the message of Surah Al-Hijr? This was another thing that required much dhikr and much prayer. And here's the answer, that what Shaitaan, the sin, or part of the sin that Shaitaan commits, is that Shaitaan, like people who live an unprincipled life, or a life that is lived in error, fails to see the entire moral picture. Yes, Adam is created from clay, but have you looked into what is inside that clay? Inside that clay is Rawhullah, the breath of God that gave Adam life. Inside that clay is an intellect that is capable of learning. The failure to consider the totality of things led to the moral error of Shaitaan. But so is the nature of sexism and racism and bigotry. When I am a racist, what is the sin that I'm committing? I'm looking at the color of skin and failing to consider what is beyond the color of skin. What do you call that? You call that ijtiza'. Ijtiza'u shay'. What does ijtiza' mean? It means that you took a part, you've only segmented the issue, partialized the issue. You are so simple-minded and ignorant and idiotic that you fail to see the totality of the picture. And what is the totality of the picture? That this person is not just color of skin. That this is a whole, total person. When I am a sexist, what is the sin that I'm really committing? I look at a woman and I see that she's a woman. She has the physical features of a woman. What do I ignore? I ignore what's inside that woman. And ijtiza' is a huge sin. Is the secret for so much sin. When I am selfish, I am looking only to my needs and my wants and my desires. But I'm failing to look at the totality of the picture. When I live a wishful life, when I live a life where I don't do what my faith demands that I do, I am living an inconsistent and an unsystematic and a a paradoxical life, a contradictory life. Why am I living a contradictory life? Because of an ijtiza, that I take only a part that I like and ignore so many other parts. If you want to put it differently, and this actually, I kept hearing this over and over, and this was years ago. The nature of justice is do unto others as you want done unto you. What is that? When you do unto others what you want done to you, you take the full picture into account. When you fail to do that, you are doing ijtiza. You are taking only a part of what equity and justice and morality would require, and implementing that part and ignoring the rest. And ijtiza was, and we will see, by the way, how Surah Al-Hijr will at the end come and slap us in the face by telling us this is the nature of immorality. You'll see it come. Just wait, because it's coming. It's a full, comprehensive, symphonic performance, as all the surah of the Quran are. So Shaitaan looks only at the part, the superficial part, doesn't look beyond that, fails to consider the entire picture, and spins off into. And now note here, when Shaitaan is interacting with God and says that I am not going to prostrate, and then Allah says, okay, well, you are cursed, get out of here. And Shaitan says, okay, well, don't damn me now, but give me a chance that I will test them, and so on and so forth. Ayah number 29. Shaitan says, and remember when thy Lord said unto the angels, my eyesight is not good. So it's Ayah 39. He said, Shaitan said, then verily, God said, then verily thou art among those granted respite till the day of the moment known, until the final day. Shaitan said, my Lord, since thou hast caused me to err, I shall surely make things seem fair unto them on earth, and I shall cause them to err altogether. Note the Shaitan here response to Allah says, Rabbi bima aghwaytani, Lord, by which you have caused me to err. Did Allah cause Shaitan to err? Is it Allah's fault that Shaitan did what Shaitan did? The answer is no. But, and this is something, by the way, that has been written about considerable amount in Islamic theology. The nature of defiant and confused people, like Shaitan, is to blame others for their mistakes and to project fault. So Shaitan's first response is Rabbi bima aghwaytani, because it's your fault, God. It's, some Muslim theologians like to speculate what would have happened if Shaitan would have said, okay, sorry God, I please forgive me, I was wrong. But Shaitan's defiance is in the belief that, well, it's not my fault. It's the fault of others. It's circumstances that forced me to be placed in this defiant position. Blame the circumstances. And this is what people that are weak and confused do all the time. They live, as we will see further in Surah Al-Hijr, it's not my fault. My moods are affected by things that happen to me. Sometimes, when they're insolent, they'll even blame God. But in effect, by the way, when you blame circumstances or others, rather than look inwards, you are either being impolite with God, or you are in fact blaming God. But we just don't like to confront that. We just don't like to admit that. You're saying, I don't like what's happening to me and it's not my fault. So if it's not the fault of any other human beings, then who is the Lord of circumstances? It's God. This is the shaitani part. This is the part from which the shaitan enters again and again and again. Now, the good news that Surah Al-Hijr, however, gives us is that, you know what? Shaitan himself admits that he has no influence over Ibadullah al-Mukhlasin. Shaitan himself admits that what does Mukhlasin? Let's see first the translation. Sorry, 40. Except sincere servants among them. You said that's what I was scared of. Ibad Allah al-Mukhlasin. It is not Ibadullah al-Mukhlisin. It is not those who are sincere servants. Al-Mukhlasin means those the Ibadullah, the people of God. Al-Mukhlasin meaning those who struggle to be with God. It is not that they are in a state of ikhlas already. Al-Mukhlasin means that they are people who struggle to be on the side of God. So it is like you are struggling to join a party, and that party is protected by God. And what does God respond to this? قال هذا صراط مستقيم. Here the qala is me. Who? It's not the devil who's speaking. It's God who's speaking. And God is saying, yes, you see, now here is a straight path. What does that mean? Here is a straight path. What Allah is telling us is that there is those who struggle to be on the side of God, those who understand that the world has a Lord, and has an inheritor, and has an owner. Those who understand all of that, and those who understand that egoism and arrogance and bigotry means that you are not committed to seeing the truth in all its nuances and in its full picture, but you only take what you want and then you declare that in a convictional manner to be the only thing that you are committed to, and you're going to ignore the rest. That's what bigotry is. Sexism, racism, whatever it is. You don't see the full, you refuse to give equal weight to everything that deserves equal weight. So the skin of the person is far more important than their heart and intellect. The gender of a person is far more important than their heart and their intellect, and etc. etc. The age of a person is far important than anything else. That's the partiality in knowledge and the التجزئة. What is the straight path? The straight path is to realize all of that. هذا صراط مستقيم. Allah is saying, oh, yes, those who understand that either they are with me or they're fair game. If they're with me, they're no longer fair game. So then this is affirmed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّ عِبَادِي لَيْسَ لَكَ عَلَيْهِمْ سُلْطَانٌ إِلَّا مَنِ اتَّبَعَكَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ. Those who are committed to me, you have no authority or jurisdiction over them. It means that if they go towards you, it will be their choice. It is because of their choice in life that they drift away from the divine to the demonic. But Allah's protection was offered to them and granted to them. Now, again, if I had the students working with me, this would be something that we would spend a lot of time on. But my journey with the Quran has convinced me of the following. There is an evil that develops from drifting away from God, and there is an evil that develops from a companionship with the demonic. And you go in stages. When you're born on the side of the divine. It is your choices in life that start taking you away from the jurisdiction and the sovereignty of the divine, the protection of the divine, the protective shield of the divine. And the more you drift away and further away you get from the light and closer you get to the dark, the closer you get to the territory where you are no longer erring because of failure of judgment, but erring because of an affirmative intervention of the demonic. And once you are in the grasp of the demonic, coming back to the divine becomes harder. When your sin is the result of omission, it is much easier to go back to Allah. But if you keep omitting, and you drift to the demonic, loosening the grasp of the demonic is not as easy as people think. I would have loved the opportunity, and maybe Allah will and Allah have the opportunity to take some people, through a journey so they can fully understand that and why that is. But, demons surround us. And our lifestyles opens up spaces for demons and invites demons into our lives. It's for people who see this truth, it blows my mind that there are people who live wanting to believe that evil just doesn't exist, or that it doesn't interact with us. It in fact interacts with us all the time. And not all jinn are evil, obviously, but the jinn that have committed to Shaitaan, and the jinn that have committed to defying Allah, and frankly, are committing to being enemies of Allah. The extent to which they hate human beings, they absolutely despise human beings, it just always amazes me. I mean, they're raised on that, and they're taught that. They are the most racist beings. In fact, that's why, like, white supremacists and Nazis reminds me of demons, because they share with them the racism. The racism of demons is directed at humanity, all human beings. They hate human beings just because of what they are. And white supremacists and Nazis and so on, they hate people just because of what they are. Okay. Note, then, after giving us that principle, critical principle of the demonic and the divine, and what leads to the demonic and what leads to the divine, as the Quran regularly does, it reminds us of the world of consequences. It reminds us of the world of consequences, as we will see, to tell us that without a world of consequences, your life would be meaningless. But then it brings the entire picture to us by, if you look at ayah 49 and 50, نبئ عبادي أني أنا الغفور الرحيم وأن عذابي هو العذاب الأليم. So, what is the entire picture? I, Allah, I am the most forgiving and merciful. And at the same time, my punishment is severe. What do people who are confused and lost do? They do istihza. Now, pay attention to this. When I prayed and this visited me, I kept bawling tears. The istihza is those people who pick and choose with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Either they want to believe that just in Allah's mercy and forgiveness and ignore Allah's punishment. And these are the wishful people. The people who think that they can live a life of sin and it doesn't matter. But then there are the other people who focus on Allah's punishment and ignore Allah's mercy and forgiveness. And these are the angry people, the fanatic people, the woe to you people. You want the total truth, commit to the balance, as we will see in Surah Al-Hijr when it reminds us of the balance in a second. Commit to the truth, which is both the forgiving and merciful and the punishing. In other words, the just. That the meaning of life is the justice in consequences. To be a balanced human being, understand both in full measure, and don't give an egotistical preference to one over the other according to your hawa, according to your own whim. Okay, let's pray Al-Hijr because we're going to move on to the next segment in Surah Al-Hijr.